Hey guys, Andy Stacks here. This is a continuation of a series of hands from the APT 7 Max Championship event in Taipei. I'll continue to break down my reasoning on different spots that came up in this tournament, both big and small. As always, please like, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and leave any comments, critiques, or suggestions below. Alright, let's get started. So in this first hand, I had just got moved to a new table, and after a couple of unsuccessful bluffs, I was starting to get blinded down in chips. The blinds were 400, 800. I had about 19 big blinds left. I'm in the big blind and look down at 710 offsuit. There's a raise from the cutoff to 1600. The button flats the 1600. Small blind folds. Getting a good price to call here versus a wider pre-flop raising range. I make the call for 800 more. The flop comes king of diamonds, nine of diamonds, nine of spades. I check. The cutoff makes a c-bet of 1700. The button quickly folds. Here with a very weak hand with just a weak backdoor straight draw and flush draw, the default play is just to fold. But I think in this situation it's actually worth considering a check raise. Firstly, I have the 10 of diamonds in my hand, which does block some combinations of his flush draws that can continue. Having the 10 in my hand does also reduce the likelihood of him having 9-10. It is also credible to have lots of 9s here calling from the big blind. So I decide to go for it here and check raise to 4,000. Not a big check raise, and I don't really think a big size is needed. If I did have trip 9s here, this also would be the size I would be using. The cutoff thinks about it for a while and does make the fold. I think one thing to note here is when I make the call pre-flop with 710 offsuit, I'm just not going to hit the board often enough to justify the call pre-flop if I'm not also willing to make some bluffs post-flop when I miss. My hand has such low equity here, and I shouldn't go overboard with this and start check raising every board with total air, but I think it's important to actively look for opportunities to attack boards where I'm able to block some of my opponent's continues and also where his range could be quite wide. Let's move on to the next hand. In this hand, I'm in the big blind and look down at King Jack of clubs. Under the gun raises to 1800. It folds around to the small blind who folds, and I make the easy call for 1000 more. We go heads up. The flop comes ace of spades, king of hearts, nine of hearts, giving me middle pair with a jack kicker. I check it over to my opponent, who makes a c-bet of 2000. In this spot, I would much rather have at least one club on the board, giving me backdoor flush potential. But with middle pair here, obviously I have to at least call once. The turn comes the jack of diamonds, now giving me two pair. I am still losing to a lot of combination of hands. However, when I decide to check it over, he checks it back as well, which makes it very unlikely that he has any of the hands that have me beat, such as hands like ace king, ace jack, pocket nines, queen 10. The river comes the eight of clubs. The front door heart draw missed, and I decide to go for a larger polarizing bet of 8,000, close to a pot size bet. It doesn't take too long before throwing in the call, and I scoop a pretty big pot here, adding a hefty chunk to my stack. In this next one, I'm in the big blind and I look down at ace 10 offsuit. The cutoff raises to 1600, the button calls 1600, small blind folds, and I think this is a perfect spot for a 3-bet squeeze. I raise it up to 6000. The cutoff thinks about it for a bit. He covers both of us and eventually decides to go all in. The button folds, and here for 40 big blinds, this is an easy fold. We're dominated by all the hands that he would be doing this with, ace king, ace queen, pocket tens, so although it didn't work out here, it's important to not get discouraged when this happens and to continue to look for good pre-flop squeeze spots with hands like ace 10 offsuit that don't mind raising as a steal but then folding to a 4-bet. In this next hand, I'm in the small blind with ace 7 offsuit. It folds around to me with just the big blind left to act behind me. I decide to raise to 3600. The big blind who had me covered decided to put me all in, which was 23,900 more for me to call. And here I think I made a big mistake. At the time, looking at the clock, there's about a minute left until the blinds got raised to 500, 1000, 1000. If I made the fold here, I'd still be left with about 24 big blinds, very workable stack. At the time, I think I miscalculated and thought I would be left with a lot less. So I did end up calling off here and was pretty happy to see that I was at least flipping as he turned over pocket threes. The board came out king 5 king, and the turn was another 5, which counterfeited his pair of threes. The river was a queen, and I was able to get a full double up. So even though this was a great result, I think this was way too loose of a call-off, facing a big blind shove here of about 34 big blinds. It's just way too much. My hand here works way better as a limp shove over a raise, versus raising and then calling off versus a shove. This hand is just too weak to call off, letting the equities run out, and it performs much better as a shove, which can fold out some hands that are slightly better than Ace-7. So definitely misplayed this one, but my stack is now up to about 55 big blinds at the 500 1k blind level starting next hand. Blinds up, I'm under the gun and look down at Ace-King offsuit and open to 2300. Folds around to the small blind, who calls for 1800 more, and the big blind defends as well. We go three ways to the flop of 4 spades, 7 of diamonds, 8 of diamonds. Both the blinds check to me. Here I flopped a backdoor nut flush draw with 2 overcards, but it's on a board where it's quite unfavorable for my range. And if I were to make a stab here, I am susceptible to a lot of check raises from the players in the blinds. Happy to check back and see a turn, which comes the 9 of diamonds, giving me the nut flush draw. The small blind now leads out for 2600, the big blind folds. And now with 2 overcards and the nut flush draw, my hand does have a ton of equity, and I also could still be ahead with ace high. However, it's kind of an annoying spot for me because I think my hand looks like exactly what it is when I just check back the flop and decide to call the turn. There's not really that much implied odds. It's not like if a diamond comes on the river or even an ace or a king, he's gonna be willing to put a lot more chips into the pot. But with that said, I do still have to make the call. The river comes the 5 of hearts. I missed. And he bets again, this time for a large bet of 8,000. Unless the diamond came on the river or a face card like a queen or a jack, which may allow me to bluff, the small blind here is just able to apply a ton of pressure regardless of his actual hand, since this specific river is so unlikely to improve my hand as my range is very capped. It might be a bit tempting to think about raising here, trying to represent the nut flush, but I think at this stage of the tournament, without any ICM pressure or without any real history with this opponent, it's probably going to be a hard sell. So let's just give up and fold this one before we get any crazy ideas. So a few orbits go by, slowly getting blinded down until I look down at ace deuce offsuit in the big blind. It folds around to the small blind, who raises to 3,300. He had about 20k behind, so I had him covered, and I think against his stack size, the best play here is to just move in. It's not going to feel good if I get snap called, but by raising all in, I'm able to maximize my fold equity and force him to make a decision for his tournament life. Fortunately, he does fold very quickly. Soon after that hand, 3 guys get into a big all-in pre-flop, with the guy to my right having ace-king, and he's up against pocket kings and ace-queen, and he ends up hitting the ace on the flop to triple up. Sometimes these pre-flop coolers will propel players to having a huge stack, but we really can't rely on them happening to us. What we can do is focus on steadily playing our best in all the other smaller pots, which will let us win the max if we do get into these type of pre-flop coolers and get lucky enough to win them. Next hand, I'm under the gun, and this time it's my turn getting pocket kings. The blinds are now 700, 1400, and I raise it up to 2800. Only the cutoff calls. We go heads up to the flop. Jack of clubs, 2 of clubs, 3 of hearts. I make a c-bet of 2500, and the cutoff thinks about it for a bit and decides to raise to 6200. I had about 26 big blinds left, and he had me slightly covered, and now I have a decision between calling and shoving. I think being out of position, I'd lean a lot more towards shoving. If he had a hand like top pair or a flush draw, I don't want to give him the opportunity to check back on the turn if I did just call the raise. On this board, he could have some of the sets, but at this stack depth, my hand's too strong to fold, and without a club in my hand, it makes it slightly more likely that he's holding 2 clubs. So I do shove all in, and he does make the call and shows ace-5 of clubs. We're very close in equities here, but the turn comes the beautiful king of spades, now severely reducing his outs. And the river is the jack of diamonds, give me a full house. I get a full double up. I'm up to about 53 big blinds now, and he's left with just a few big blinds. Alright guys, that's all the hands for today. We'll continue this series in the next video. As always, let me know your thoughts on any of the hands today. Like and subscribe, turn on the notification bell. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. 喜欢我的影片，不要忘记按赞、订阅、打开小铃铛。